So it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, would be amiss if I didn't, connect the AI theme in India as well too. And I think, picking up on that point, before we go into some other topics, we had this old narrative, which was, okay, when we had the original .com era, over 2 decades ago, that was something that kind of originated in Silicon Valley on the West Coast and then propagated over to Asia. I think with what's happening in AI today, while we do have different pockets around the world where the foundation models have leadership, in terms of, I think the AI adoption of how folks are bringing it into their daily life and how companies are bringing it into their workflows, actually on many metrics, India is a leader in this area, right? So that energy is really connecting to this AI theme as well too.
Yeah, and I think, we need to come to that, the role of India in AI. I think just the way to open it for me is that, I've listened throughout the day, and all day we hear AI, AI, AI. You open a newspaper, you read about AI. You watch the TV, you hear about AI. And, if you're so immersed in it like me, occasionally you just think, God, are we going to get bored of hearing about AI? Why is everyone talking about it? I want to just stop for a minute and say, look around you right now. Look at every single thing in this room. Everything that you see was the product of intelligence. It was designed, it was built, it was arranged, it was moved. We're talking in language, something that is innate to our intelligence. Intelligence isn't just another thing. It is the architect of our whole world. So suddenly to be able to recreate that, to copy it, to bottle it, that is something really significant. And I think that means it's not overdone. We're not hearing about AI too much because this really is transformational to the carpet beneath our feet, the lights above us, to the content that we're looking at. It is everything. So that's what I sort of think. In big terms, that's all true. Do you think we're seeing that on the ground?
I think we're starting to see that on the ground. And I actually think there's potentially 2 waves of what's coming, right? So I think you're exactly right in terms of, yes, AI is a technology. So there's one frame of mind that says, oh, we have another technology trend that's here, right? But we actually, I would argue, in any of our lifetimes, have not had a technology that has such a profound, you could say, mimicking of intelligence, or you could argue such a profound impact on how knowledge work is done. And you could say, yes, we were able to connect to the internet 25 years ago. We've had various things, but actually, if you think about how humans interact with the world around them, how they create, you say, value in society, right? A lot of it boils down to knowledge work, and we are at the very early stages of how this revolution is fundamentally changing knowledge work. It is amongst some companies and some other entities, but we're just getting started on that. And I think the second wave, which therefore comes, is, well, knowledge work is the things that live in our heads for the most part. But as we start to connect and are already starting to connect some of these types of foundation models to the robotics as well too, that is where we have, some call it embodied AI, right? That connection between all this power that we are seeing and really interacting with in our computers right now, starting to actually have a direct connection into the physical world. And that is a wave which is just beginning to start and is probably going to pick up. But I think you've been seeing this in some areas as well too.
Yeah, so, what people are missing really about AI now is that, yeah, we're talking about a cognitive change. But what that cognitive change has already done is it's unlocked robotics. So, for the past, 40 years, we've had some success with robotics, but try to get a robot arm to pick up an egg. Try to get a robot arm to pluck an apple off a tree. Try to get a robot to cook your supper. Just can't do any of these things. But large language models, the transformer architecture, the things that have become the dominant paradigm in AI, it turns out they generalize to robotics. So, this is huge. So much of the world that we live in is physical. It's not just about intelligence, it's about intelligence coupled with physicality. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think we're also seeing another AI revolution happening we've got used to ChatGPT, we've got used to Copilot, we've got used to language. That in itself is huge. When I first started going into AI, people thought language was decades away. It was just too complex, too nuanced. Now we're entering the agentic era. So now we have agents that are interacting with the world and that can do things on people's behalf. It's not just saying, it's doing.
Yes. And I think what's starting to bubble up is there are real agents being deployed today, and we're just starting to see the beginning of it. In our research, we find that there's probably only about 5% of companies in the world who are actually fundamentally transforming the way that they operate with AI. And if you look at what, I think we think of Gen AI, we think of what's been happening as like, I can do language, I can make images, right? But I will give you a manufacturing example, right? If I have an agent that thinks about how do I run the predictive maintenance of my lines, right? When should I take down certain machines, right, for maintenance because that's better off in the overall. If I have another agent that's working on production scheduling and planning, and I have another agent that runs both of those agents and says, how do I actually optimize across both of them? I suddenly have an incredible power in driving like a new frontier of efficiency. If you go inside, that's a manufacturing example. If you go inside banks, if you go inside some consumer products companies, they are starting to actually deploy agents to do this, I would say, complicated but moderately low stakes work today. And it does fundamentally require a real rethinking and retooling of how a company works end to end, which is what we are just discovering on how to do, and we're really at chapter 1.
Yeah, so I think, what do you make of this? This is how we often think about this. Today in a company, you've got the employees. Tomorrow in a company, you will have mixed teams of human employees and agents. And so wherever you see a person, you're likely to also have a number, potentially a very large number of agents working with them. And so these frontier firms are going to be blends of agents doing loads of things, people coordinating those agents and instructing them, those agents reporting back. Do you see that as something that's happening or coming?
It actually is already happening, and you see even a few archetypes, right? You have agents that are going off and doing tasks defined by humans and then coming back and reporting, right? So therefore you could say humans intersecting with or managing agents. We will start to see agents which are smart enough to know when I have to ask the human for help. So actually humans are just a biological form of agent, right? And so indeed there are these mixed teams that are being created. I don't think yet, let's be clear, we're at the stage where fundamentally HR is managing agents, right? That's going a little bit too far in terms of where things are today, but actually rethinking through workflows in terms of what is best for agents to do, what is best for humans to do, what is best for them to do together, what is best for them to do separate. This is the new theory of work, which is just getting written right now.
So, basically then, if you think about it, we've touched on robotics and we've touched on agents. What we're looking at is a world that in the next, let's say, 3 to 15 years, is suddenly we've got people, we've got disembodied agents living in the cloud, and then we've also got humanoids or other forms of robots. So suddenly that's a very, very different world to the one we live in today. And that's why I think AI is so powerful. Is that going to lead to a massive boom in economic growth? Personally, I think probably yes. Is there another narrative, or where are you on that?
Yeah. And I almost thought it was a joke, but there was a paper that came out by one of the Federal Reserve banks in the United States, which basically gave 2 scenarios of GDP per capita in the medium term. And in one scenario, it grew exponentially to infinity, and the other scenario is we were eliminated by AI and therefore went to zero.
And the third narrative was that it just kind of bumps along a little bit faster than now.
Which is the least predictive prediction you could possibly imagine, right? It's infinity zero or somewhere in between, right? But, I think it's a very common statement now that we overestimate how tomorrow's going to change, but we underestimate the medium term. I am very optimistic because, ultimately, I actually come down, if we just take the economic view and we think about the work that most people do every day, the majority of people don't enjoy the majority of their day at work, right? Everyone has, and if you talk to, everyone here is leaders in various contexts. you always feel short of great people and great skilled people, right? And so if we think about this AI revolution as saying, hey, why don't I take off the plate the work that people hate to do and the work that is really not fully utilizing their skills as humans, right? That's a positive thing, right? And so I think what the human ingenuity will allow us to do and will allow everyone to do is actually take that kind of new equation of what work looks like, and then we reconfigure what economic productivity looks like. Now, are there going to be some difficult collisions, difficult transitions in that process? For sure, right? There is no question about that. But overall, we've found a way to deal with, I'd say, persevere and thrive to a new level in many of these revolutions, and I think AI is yet another one of those.
Yeah, that's how I think of it. Really, it is of a magnitude. It's of an industrial revolution. One sort of critical thing in this that I think people are very aware of is who are the nations that are building it. And the truth in AI right now is there are two leading nations, the United States and China. And these are the countries that have the companies, and largely AI is being built and driven by private companies. They have the companies that are operating at the frontier and pushing at the frontier. But I honestly think that there is room, and there has to be room for a kind of third pole in this equation. And there are only two realistic players in the world who could do that. One would be Europe, and two is India. And of those two, I would personally be betting on India. India has vast reserves of data, and data is the key to making AI work really, really well. India has engineering and scientific talent second to none in the world. India has the potential for scaling up startups in a way that's true nowhere else. Meanwhile, Europe just simply isn't deploying anywhere near the amounts of capital needed to create AI. AI is expensive. Data centers are expensive. You need to be ambitious. You need to think in the future. And again, I think India is doing that. So India is incredibly well positioned, but nothing is written. Like, where are you on it?
Yeah, it's a great observation in terms of you have US, China, and then how do we think about where the other, I'd say, poles are going to be? And I think it's useful to break it down into a couple layers, right? We have oversimplifying, but we can think about there's a hardware layer, we have a foundation model layer, we have an application layer, right? Let's think in those regards. Obviously, things are quite concentrated at the hardware layer right now, right? They'll probably get less concentrated over time. We face constraints at the hardware layer, but there's tons of capital going in, so I expect that becomes less of a constraint over time. Model layer really sitting with two poles, right? Many of the frontier models, we originated in the US, and then we have many highly cost-effective, highly practical models coming out of China, right? And then there's the application layer, which is how do I think about using all of this stuff, right? And when it comes to the model layer, I suspect we'll start to see innovation out of India for sure. And then the place where I think there is infinite possibilities, the application layer, right? Because we're at this cusp here, right, of where the economy is, right, the growth of the economy, the very skilled and highly skilled workforce, the number of innovative companies in India. So much innovation is going to happen, and I think it's an interesting place to be able to both look westward and look eastward, and see. We're not going to copy one or the other, right? But actually take the parts that make sense for here from both, and that's a very unique position that India has.
Yeah, and I think bring something distinctively Indian into the equation as well. I think it's far healthier for the world if we have sort of different forms of AI that somehow emerge from different cultures, and that's a really good thing. I guess, two other things that I think it's worth touching on. So, we were talking a minute ago about, how we will live in this kind of mixed ecosystem of agents, of robots, people. One way of understanding that, and this is a metaphor, so I don't want anyone to take it literally, but one way of understanding it is it's kind of like we're creating or building a new sort of species that will live amongst us. And so for me, just talking about this in terms of work or productivity, economics, that doesn't really capture the full sense of change that is going on. These are kind of things that people are already spending hours a day talking to. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, that needs to be thought about. It's already changing how we create images or films, how we write, how we communicate, our media, our sense of who we are. And, I think that's just this really deep change. And, so there's the economic piece, but then there's just a wider sense of what's happening to us, to humanity.
Yeah, and I think we're already starting to see the interesting impacts on how we even interact as humans. Right? To give the simplest example, and I'm sure many in the room would relate to this as well too, I've had multiple people tell me over the past couple of weeks, like, sometimes I get really angry because this person is not doing something I want, or in a personal, professional context. And one of the great things I use ChatGPT or Copilot for is, how do I take some of the emotion out of that, or add some emotion into it, right? And think about how do I almost coach myself in my interactions. And so I think we're at the very early days, but you're right. It is not just about work, right? It's not just, of course, many folks are going to bring a productivity and ROI lens, thinking about impacts on economies, thinking about impacts on employment. Those things are all real, but they are real because we are fundamentally changing the way humans interact with each other and with the world. And that must have a broader and much more profound set of impacts.
So one thing that we talk about a lot at Microsoft AI on this front is a concept that we call seemingly conscious AI. And that is the point at which the models are so convincing that they're a person that people start to believe that they're conscious. So, the models have memory. They remember all of your interactions. They are communicating fluidly, naturally, with personality. They have goals. They seem to have goals that they are then pursuing in multi-step programs. All of these things are the kind of markers of consciousness that we look out for. And look, it's almost impossible that these models are conscious, but we worry that people will start to believe that they are. And so actually, designing AI, we have to design it very carefully so that it isn't pretending to be a person. It isn't pretending to be illusory. And I think, perhaps in the workplace as well, as companies do it, they need to find ways that these are complements to humanity.
Yeah. And that really connects, to one of the things that we talk about a lot at BCG, which is this principle, what we call the 10-20-70 principle. Because, I think we're both technologists. We get very excited about, exactly what's happening on the technology front. But when we look at how profound change happens powered by AI, and you think about, well, where, as a leader or a company or in a non-company context, where do I have to put my energy to make that change happen? 10% is actually, okay, what's the cool algorithm? What's the foundation model? It's important, right? But it's only 10% of the equation. 20%, which is a bit like the plumbing, is like, well, I've got to have the tech stack that means that I can scale this, means it can go to everybody. And really the big one is the 70. The 70% is, how am I thinking about change management? How am I thinking about ways of working? How am I thinking about the human side of things? Because ultimately, and if I even go back to the narrow company context for a second, if I am trying to drive impact, if I'm trying to drive productivity, efficiency, or effectiveness, if I'm not changing the way that people work, I'm not doing anything. And so therefore, actually thinking through all of that, how humans and agents are working together, how I prevent some of an automation bias, a selection bias, all the biases that could emerge from the human side when that happens. That is a new science and a new art, right? Which I think we're all going to have to become accustomed to, because that's the new reality for us.
Yeah, we're barely scratching the surface here, but I think maybe there's a couple more things that it would be good to touch on. One, I think we share an opinion on this. AI, the biggest capex story of our time, hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of dollars being spent. Is it a bubble?
Well, we are going to see certain bubbles in certain areas, but what's not going to be a bubble is the fundamental change to how we interact with AI, to how we work, to how knowledge work is done. So you can argue that there is some blips or steps back that markets will take over the coming years, but I think we share a view, whereas if we were to go stand 10 years in the future, 15 years in the future, we will look back and see those as course corrections on a fundamental change that continues.
Yeah, that's what I think. We had the dot-com boom. that was a bubble, but today the biggest companies in the world are the tech companies that grew out of that. You know, what we haven't talked about here is superintelligence, the most advanced forms of AI. At Microsoft AI, we just launched a superintelligence team yesterday, building something that we call humanist superintelligence. You know, if we can build that, and I think we can, and I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that AI that can build better AI is the route to doing it, then it's, you know, as you say, there's ups and downs, but the course, the trajectory of the technology of where our societies and civilizations are going is pretty incredible.
Yeah. And maybe we could close and leave the group with one thought. Michael, if you had one piece of advice on how everyone can, I'd say, thrive and evolve in this journey with AI, you know, personally, what would you recommend?
I think one, I would advise everyone, and probably everyone in this room and watching is already doing it, to engage with and use AI and find out how it can make you more productive, how it can enrich your life. That's one. And two, don't take your eye off it. It does need watching, it does need regulating, and it does need engaged citizens around the world who are going to push for the most responsible, the safest, and the best forms of AI that are about humanity. So please don't lose sight of that and keep pushing.
And I couldn't agree more, right? And I think maybe to close, right, probably, you know, those who thrive over the next 5, 10, or decades are going to be the, you know, regardless of where you stand today, regardless of how old you are today, wherever you are in your career and life, it's the rate of learning that matters. And the engagement with, the great thing today is anyone can learn anything about this with, you know, all the tools that are out there. And even if you haven't written a line of code in your life, you could actually go make something with AI to help you. So it's an amazingly democratized type of technology. And then, you know, we just encourage everyone to get their hands a little bit dirty with it and increase the rate of learning.
Thank you very much. Brilliant to be here.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff and Michael, for the perspective on where AI is actually headed versus where the hype is. Thanks a lot.
Moving on, as India's sporting ambitions grow from hosting global events to winning on the world stage, the voice leading the Olympic movement carries weight.
Well, Kirsty Coventry, the president of International Olympic Committee, a 7-time Olympic medalist representing Zimbabwe,